Destiny has a wicked sense of humor, choosing to strike when a woman least expects her world to shatter and rebuild itself in a single heartbeat. Serena Dove moved through the Metropolitan Museum's grand ballroom like poetry in motion, her emerald silk gown catching light from 1,000 crystal teardrops suspended from the magnificent chandelier above. Her fingers traced the diamond necklace at her throat, a family heirloom that had witnessed generations of love stories. As she surveyed the charity gala representing months of her meticulous planning, the orchid arrangements need adjustment on the east wall. She whispered into her pearl-encrusted headset, her voice carrying quiet authority that had made her Manhattan's most coveted event coordinator. Beauty demands perfection, and tonight we give these children nothing less. The Children's Hospital Charity Gala had drawn 500 of New York's most influential citizens, each diamond and silk creation representing hope for little souls fighting battles far too large for their tender hearts. Serena had poured her entire being into this evening, knowing every detail could mean the difference between life-saving equipment and empty promises. She paused beside the auction display, her heart swelling as she admired the centerpiece, a breathtaking painting of children playing in a sunlit garden. The artist had captured something ineffable about childhood innocence, and Serena found herself lost in the brushstrokes that seemed to dance with their own inner light. The piece reminded her why she had chosen event coordination over more lucrative careers. Every successful gala meant hope for families facing unimaginable challenges. The ballroom itself had been transformed into something that existed between dreams and reality. Ivory roses cascaded from towering arrangements that reached toward the museum's vaulted ceiling, their petals scattered like snow across marble floors that reflected candlelight in patterns resembling fallen stars. The scent of gardenias and white jasmine created an atmosphere so romantic that even the most cynical society matrons found themselves remembering their own wedding days with unexpected tenderness. "Excuse me, I'm terribly sorry." The deep, velvet voice made her turn just as warm champagne splashed across her gown, the golden liquid seeping into the emerald silk like liquid starlight. Time suspended itself as Serena looked up into eyes the color of stormy seas, framed by a face that belonged in Renaissance sculptures rather than modern ballrooms. Gideon Wolfe stood before her, his powerful frame filling his perfectly tailored tuxedo, but it was the genuine mortification in his expression that caught her attention. This wasn't the arrogant billionaire she'd heard whispered about in society circles. This was a man genuinely horrified by his clumsiness. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as though he'd been running his hands through it with nervous energy, and she noticed a small scar near his left temple that somehow made him seem more human than the polished magazine photographs suggested. "Please, let me," he began, pulling an immaculate handkerchief from his jacket pocket, his movements careful and reverent as he approached the stain. "It's perfectly fine," Serena said softly, though her pulse quickened as his fingers brushed hers while dabbing at the champagne. "Silk forgives what hearts sometimes cannot." Gideon's hand stilled, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Up close, she could see flecks of gold in his stormy gray eyes, could smell his cologne, something expensive but not overpowering, with hints of cedar and bergamot that reminded her of libraries and leather-bound books. "You're remarkably gracious for someone whose evening I've just ruined," he said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of vulnerability that surprised them both. "You haven't ruined anything, Mr. Wolfe." She'd recognized him the moment their eyes met. His photograph had graced countless magazine covers, though none had captured the warmth she saw flickering in their depths. "Though I confess, I'm surprised to see Manhattan's most eligible bachelor at a children's charity event." A shadow crossed his features, vulnerability replacing the confidence she'd expected. Children's causes hold special meaning for those who understand what it means to be alone in the world. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Serena found herself studying this enigma of a man wealthy beyond measure, yet speaking of loneliness with a familiarity that touched something deep within her soul. "The painting you were admiring," Gideon continued, gesturing toward the auction display. "It's remarkable how the artist captured joy in such simple brushstrokes. Children possess an innate understanding of happiness that we adults spend lifetimes trying to recapture." Serena replied, surprised by her own candor. "I believe that's why their healing matters so much. They remind us what pure hope looks like." Gideon's expression transformed, the society mask slipping away to reveal something raw and beautiful beneath. "I've never heard anyone speak about charity work with such passion. Most people attend these events for the networking opportunities, "And why are you here, Mr. Wolf?" "To meet someone exactly like you, though I never dared believe such a person existed." The words tumbled from his lips with startling honesty, causing a blush to bloom across Serena's cheeks. The orchestra began playing a haunting waltz, Chopin's Minute Waltz, transformed into something slower, more romantic, and couples drifted toward the dance floor like flowers drawn to sunlight. Gideon extended his hand with the grace of a man born to command attention, but there was something almost shy in his gesture, as though he expected rejection despite his obvious wealth and status. "Would you honor me with a dance, mysterious lady in emerald?" Serena hesitated, her practical mind warning her about the dangerous territory she was entering. Gideon Wolf's reputation preceded him. Brilliant businessman, confirmed bachelor, heartbreaker, extraordinaire. Yet something in his eyes whispered of depths unexplored, of a man yearning for connection beyond the shallow waters of society expectations. She had attended enough charity galas to recognize the type of man who usually approached her: silver-haired philanthropists seeking younger companions for their golden years, ambitious executives who saw event coordinators as useful networking contacts, or worse, married men whose wives were conveniently occupied elsewhere. But Gideon seemed different, genuinely nervous, despite his obvious advantages. "One dance," she conceded, placing her hand in his. The moment their fingers intertwined, electricity sparked between them with such intensity that Serena wondered if others could see the invisible flames dancing in the air around them. Gideon led her onto the marble floor with movements that spoke of expensive lessons and natural rhythm. But it was the way he held her as if she were made of precious crystal that made her heart skip. The ballroom faded around them until nothing existed except the music and the magnetic pull, drawing them closer with each step. "You realize I still don't know your name," he murmured against her ear as they swayed to the music, his breath sending shivers down her spine. "Serena," she whispered, the word carrying more weight than a simple introduction. "Serena Dove. Serena." He repeated her name like a prayer, his voice wrapping around each syllable with reverence. "It suits you perfectly. You emanate a peace I've never encountered before." As they danced, Serena found herself discovering facets of this man that contradicted everything she'd heard about Manhattan's most notorious bachelor. He listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions about her work and dreams, and seemed genuinely interested in her responses rather than simply waiting for his turn to talk. "I've attended hundreds of these events," Gideon confessed as the song drew to a close, "but I've never met someone who makes me forget why I usually avoid them." "And why do you avoid them?" Serena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because they're filled with people who see dollar signs when they look at me, not a man searching for something real in a world of beautiful facades." The honesty in his admission took her breath away. Here stood one of the world's most powerful men. Yet he spoke with the vulnerability of someone who had learned that money couldn't purchase the things that mattered most. When the auction began, Serena watched in amazement as Gideon bid $50,000 on the children's garden painting, not for the prestige, but because he'd noticed her admiration for it earlier. "Why?" she asked, as applause erupted around them. "Because when you looked at that painting, your entire face lit up with wonder. I wanted to see that expression again." As the evening wound to its close, and guests began departing into the star-studded night, Gideon walked Serena to the museum's grand entrance. The autumn air carried hints of change, and she pulled her silk wrap closer around her shoulders. "Have dinner with me," he said suddenly, the words carrying an urgency that surprised them both. Serena studied his face, seeing past the wealth and reputation to the man beneath, someone who had touched her soul in ways she hadn't thought possible during a single evening. "One dinner won't change my life," she said finally, the words carrying a prophecy neither of them yet understood. How magnificently wrong she would prove to be. Chapter 2. Dancing in the Rain. Sometimes, the universe conspires to teach us that the most beautiful moments bloom from the most unexpected storms. The rooftop restaurant overlooked Manhattan's glittering skyline like a jeweled crown, but Serena found herself far more captivated by the man sitting across from her than by the breathtaking view spreading beneath the star-studded heavens. Gideon had surprised her by choosing intimacy over extravagance, this hidden gem where conversation mattered more than being seen. "Tell me about your dreams," Gideon said, his hand moving gently around the rim of his wineglass as candlelight danced across his features. "Not your career ambitions or society expectations, your real dreams, the ones you whisper to the stars when no one else is listening." Serena felt her breath catch at the unexpected depth of his question. Men in her world typically asked about her work, her family connections, or her availability for future social events. None had ever inquired about the secret longings she carried in the quietest chambers of her heart. "I want to open an art therapy center for children," she admitted, surprised by her own honesty, "a place where young souls can heal through creativity, where broken spirits can discover they're actually artists waiting to bloom." Gideon leaned forward, genuine interest, lighting his features like dawn breaking over troubled waters. "What inspired such a beautiful vision?" "I spent time in hospitals as a child," Serena confessed, her voice growing soft with memory, "not as a patient, but visiting my younger cousin, who battled illness for so long. I watched how drawing and painting gave him strength when medicine couldn't touch his spirit. He taught me that healing happens in colors and brushstrokes as much as in surgery and pills." "Where is your cousin now?" Gideon asked gently. "Dancing among the angels," Serena whispered, tears threatening to spill. "But his legacy lives in every child I hope to help find their artistic voice." Gideon reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the simple gesture carrying more comfort than 1,000 empty consolations. "Your dream isn't just beautiful, Serena. It's necessary. This world needs more people who understand that healing comes in many forms." "And what about your dreams?" she asked, turning her palm upward so their fingers could intertwine. "Beyond building business empires and accumulating wealth, what makes Gideon Wolfe's soul sing?" A shadow crossed his features. Vulnerability replacing the confident facade she was beginning to recognize as carefully constructed armor. "I dream of creating something that matters beyond profit margins, of building a legacy that helps rather than simply accumulates, of finding someone who sees the man rather than the bank account." "Money doesn't define a person's worth," Serena said softly, "though I imagine it makes relationships complicated when you can never be certain of people's motivations." "Precisely," he replied, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. "I've learned to recognize the signs. Women who research my net worth before our first date, friends whose enthusiasm corresponds directly to my latest stock performance, family members who only call when they need financial assistance." "That sounds incredibly lonely," Serena observed, her heart aching for the isolation she heard beneath his words. "It was," Gideon admitted, "until tonight, until I met a woman who looked at a painting and saw hope for children she'd never met, who turned a spilled champagne disaster into conversation, who dreams of healing the world, one young artist at a time." Thunder rumbled overhead like nature's percussion section, and the first fat raindrops began spattering against the restaurant's glass walls. Other diners hurried inside, but Serena found herself drawn to the windows, watching the storm transform the city into something magical and wild. "We should go inside," Gideon suggested as lightning illuminated the sky in brilliant white flames. "Or we could stay here and watch the world wash itself clean," Serena countered. Surprising herself with her spontaneous suggestion, Gideon studied her face, seeing something that made him smile with genuine delight. "You're not like other women I've known." "How so?" "Most would be horrified at the thought of their hair getting wet or their dress being ruined. You look at the storm like it's a gift." Before Serena could respond, the heavens opened with dramatic flare, sending torrents of rain cascading across the rooftop in silver sheets. The restaurant staff scrambled to move furniture and escort guests inside, but Serena remained mesmerized by nature's spectacular display. "Dance with me," Gideon said suddenly, standing and extending his hand with the same gallant gesture he'd offered at the charity gala. "In the rain?" Serena laughed, her eyes sparkling with delight at his unexpected proposition, "especially in the rain. When will we ever have such a perfect moment again?" Without hesitation, Serena placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her into the storm. The rain soaked through her silk dress within seconds, plastering her hair against her face, and transforming her elegant appearance into something wild and beautiful. But as Gideon's arms encircled her waist, and they began swaying to music only they could hear, Serena realized she had never felt more alive. "You're magnificent," Gideon murmured against her ear, his voice barely audible above the storm's symphony. "Absolutely magnificent. I must look like a drowned cat," Serena laughed, but she made no move to escape his embrace. "You look like a goddess celebrating life itself," he replied. His hands framed her face with infinite tenderness, thumbs brushing raindrops from her cheeks like precious pearls. "I've never met anyone who embraces the unexpected with such joy." As lightning illuminated their faces, Gideon leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that tasted of rain and possibility. Serena had been kissed before, but never like this, never with such reverence, such promise, such perfect recognition of two souls finding their match in the midst of a storm. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and soaked to the skin, Serena realized that something fundamental had shifted in her world. This wasn't just attraction or infatuation. This was the kind of connection that poets wrote sonnets about. The kind of love that made ordinary people capable of extraordinary things. "I should get you home before you catch pneumonia," Gideon said reluctantly, though his arms remained securely around her waist. "Probably wise," Serena agreed, though she made no effort to step away from his warmth. Over the following days, their courtship unfolded like a beautiful symphony, each encounter adding new layers to their growing connection. Gideon took her to art galleries where they spent hours discussing the stories hidden within brushstrokes and sculptures. They walked through Central Park, feeding ducks and sharing childhood memories on park benches, worn smooth by countless other love stories. Unlike the flashy displays of wealth she might have expected, Gideon seemed determined to show her his heart rather than his portfolio. He listened when she spoke about her work, asked thoughtful questions about her family, and shared stories of his own childhood loneliness with a vulnerability that touched her soul. "I've never had anyone take such genuine interest in my thoughts," Serena confessed during one of their quiet dinners at a small Italian restaurant tucked away from the society scene. "I find everything about you fascinating," Gideon replied. "The way you tilt your head when you're thinking deeply, how your eyes light up when you talk about helping children, the fact that you choose substance over surface every single time. And I love how you notice details that other people overlook," Serena responded. "You see the world through an artist's eyes, even though you've spent your life building business empires." When Faith Harper, Serena's protective sister, voiced concerns about Gideon's reputation, Serena found herself defending him with passionate conviction. "He's different than what people say," Serena insisted during lunch at their favorite cafe. "He's thoughtful and kind and genuinely interested in making the world better." "Just be careful," Faith warned, her eyes reflecting sisterly concern. "Rich men can be very charming when they want something." But Ilara Crest, Serena's dearest friend since childhood, offered enthusiastic encouragement. "He's perfect for you," Ilara declared, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I've never seen you so happy, so alive. He brings out a radiance in you that's absolutely breathtaking." As their relationship deepened, Serena discovered layers of complexity in Gideon that contradicted every preconception about wealthy playboys. He donated anonymously to numerous charities, maintained genuine friendships with people from all walks of life, and treated service staff with the same respect he showed business associates. The evening that would forever change her world began with Gideon's nervous energy, his usual confidence replaced by endearing uncertainty. "I have a surprise for you," he said, leading her to a wing of the children's hospital that had been closed for renovations. When he opened the doors, Serena gasped in wonder. The space had been transformed into a beautiful art therapy center, complete with natural lighting, child-sized easels, and walls designed for displaying young masterpieces. "This is your dream," Gideon said softly. "I wanted to help make it reality." Tears of joy streamed down Serena's face as she realized the magnitude of his gift. This wasn't just an expensive renovation. This was understanding, support, and belief in her vision made manifest. "How did you?" she began, but words failed her. "I listened," Gideon said simply, "and I realized that supporting your dreams might be the most important thing I ever accomplish." Standing in that beautiful space, surrounded by the promise of healing and hope, Serena understood that she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with a man whose heart proved far more valuable than his fortune. Chapter 3. Promises in Paradise. Paradise isn't a place on any map. It's the moment when two hearts recognize they were created to beat in perfect harmony. The private jet descended through cotton candy clouds toward an emerald island that seemed painted by angels themselves. But Serena felt nervous, butterflies dancing in her stomach as she gazed through the oval window. Gideon's invitation to his Caribbean retreat had surprised her with its sudden intimacy, and she found herself questioning whether she was ready for whatever this tropical sanctuary might reveal about their deepening relationship. "Having second thoughts?" Gideon asked softly, his perceptive eyes catching the uncertainty she thought she'd hidden beneath her composed exterior. "Not about you," Serena admitted, her fingers nervously adjusting the flowing white sundress she'd chosen for travel. But this feels like crossing a threshold we can't uncross. Gideon reached over and intertwined their fingers with the tender reverence that had become his signature gesture. We'll cross only the thresholds you choose, Serena. This island is about giving us space to discover who we are together, away from society's expectations and prying eyes. As the plane touched down on a runway carved into tropical perfection, Serena felt her reservations begin dissolving like sugar in warm tea. The island wasn't the ostentatious display of wealth she might have expected. Instead, it felt like stepping into a natural cathedral where luxury served beauty rather than ego. The villa that would be their sanctuary perched on a cliff overlooking crystalline waters that shifted from turquoise to sapphire as clouds painted shadows across the surface. Bougainvillea cascaded over natural stone walls like living jewels, and the sound of waves provided nature's own symphony of serenity. Exotic birds created flashes of brilliant color against emerald foliage, their songs weaving melodies that seemed composed specifically for lovers discovering paradise together. It's breathtaking, Serena breathed, stepping onto the terrace where hummingbirds darted between flowering vines like tiny rainbow jewels. I hoped you'd find it peaceful, Gideon said, though she caught the nervous undertone in his voice. I've never brought anyone here before. This place has always been my refuge from the world's demands. The admission touched something deep within Serena's heart. This island represented Gideon's most private sanctuary, and by bringing her here, he was sharing the vulnerable spaces of his soul that no fortune could purchase or society could penetrate. Their first evening unfolded like poetry written in candlelight and ocean breeze. Dinner appeared on the terrace, as if by magic, fresh seafood prepared by an invisible chef, tropical flowers adorning a table set for two beneath a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to pluck from the velvet sky. The warm trade winds carried the intoxicating perfume of frangipani and jasmine, creating an atmosphere so romantic it felt almost surreal. Tell me about your childhood, Serena requested as they savored grilled lobster with mango salsa, the ocean providing percussion for their intimate conversation. Gideon's expression grew contemplative as he gazed across the moonlit waters. Lonely, mostly. My parents viewed me as their heir rather than their child, someone to be groomed for success rather than cherished for simply existing. Boarding schools, summer business camps, dinners where the conversation centered on stock portfolios rather than dreams or fears. That explains so much about you, Serena said gently, her heart aching for the boy who had been forced to become a businessman before learning to be a man. How so? The way you notice details about people, how you listen so intently when others speak, your genuine surprise when someone shows interest in your thoughts rather than your wealth. You're still that little boy hoping someone will see him for who he is rather than what he possesses. Gideon's eyes grew luminous with unshed tears. You see me more clearly than I see myself sometimes. Because I love what I see, Serena whispered, the words escaping before she could consider their weight. The silence that followed stretched between them like a bridge neither had expected to build so soon. But the truth hung in the tropical air, with the sweetness of frangipani and the power of lightning about to strike. I love you too, Gideon said finally, his voice carrying wonder, as if he'd discovered a new continent within his own heart. I've never said those words before, and meant them completely. They made love that night with the tenderness of souls recognizing their perfect match. The ocean's rhythm provided the soundtrack for their physical and emotional communion. Serena had known passion before, but never this profound sense of completeness, never this feeling that she'd found the other half of herself in someone else's embrace. The villa's master bedroom, with its flowing white curtains and panoramic view of the moonlit sea, became their private world where nothing existed beyond their whispered promises and intertwined hearts. Over the following days, their connection deepened, like roots finding rich soil. They swam in hidden lagoons where tropical fish painted the water with living rainbows, the coral formations creating underwater gardens that rivaled anything human hands could design. They explored secluded beaches where their footprints in pristine sand marked the first steps of their journey toward forever, collecting shells that would become treasured memories of these perfect days. The island's natural wonders provided endless opportunities for discovery. They kayaked through mangrove tunnels where sunlight filtered through emerald canopies, creating cathedral-like spaces where only their whispered conversations disturbed the sacred silence. They hiked to hidden waterfalls where they bathed beneath cascading freshwater, while rainbow mists created halos around their laughter. "I've been thinking about your art therapy center," Gideon said one afternoon as they lounged in hammocks strung between coconut palms, the dappled sunlight creating patterns across their sun-warmed skin. "What about it?" Serena asked, turning to face him with curiosity. "What if we expanded the vision? What if we created a network of centers, places where children from all backgrounds could discover healing through creativity? We could build something that changes thousands of lives rather than just dozens." Serena felt her pulse quicken with excitement at the possibilities. His suggestion opened. "That would require enormous funding, careful planning, trained staff, all manageable obstacles when you have the right vision and the right partner," Gideon replied, his eyes holding depths of possibility that took her breath away. "I've spent so long accumulating wealth without understanding its true purpose. Maybe I was meant to use it to make your dreams bigger than you ever dared imagine." "You would do that?" Serena asked. Though she already knew the answer in her heart, "I would do anything to see that light in your eyes every day for the rest of my life." Their conversations during these magical days revealed layers of compatibility that went beyond physical attraction or shared interests. They discovered they both loved reading poetry under starlight. Both felt moved by classical music that seemed to speak directly to their souls. Both believed that true wealth lay in experiences shared rather than possessions accumulated. They talked about everything, childhood fears that had shaped their adult perspectives, dreams that seemed too audacious to voice aloud, hopes for a future that included not just personal happiness, but meaningful contribution to the world's healing. That evening, as they strolled along the beach where waves whispered ancient secrets to the shore, Gideon stopped walking and turned to face her with an expression that made her heart skip several beats. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of coral and gold, creating a backdrop so beautiful it seemed, designed by divine providence for this perfect moment. "Serena," he began, his voice carrying the weight of momentous words, "I need to tell you something that I've never shared with another living soul." She waited, sensing the importance of whatever revelation was coming. "I've been alone my entire life. Even when surrounded by people, I've attended countless social gatherings where I was the guest of honor, yet felt completely isolated. I've had relationships that looked perfect from the outside, but left me feeling emptier than before." He cupped her face in his hands, with infinite gentleness. "But with you, I've discovered what it means to truly be seen, truly be known, truly be loved for who I am rather than what I can provide." Tears of joy streamed down Serena's cheeks as she recognized the profound gift of his vulnerability. "You've given me something I never believed possible," Gideon continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "You've given me a home in your heart, a purpose beyond profit, and a future worth building together." In one fluid motion, Gideon dropped to one knee in the sand, pulling a velvet box from his pocket, as waves crashed behind him like nature's applause for this perfect moment. "This ring belonged to my grandmother," he said, opening the box to reveal an exquisite emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the moonlight like captured stars. "She was the only person who truly loved me unconditionally before I met you. She always said I should save it for a woman who would cherish the man rather than covet the fortune." Serena gasped at the ring's beauty, but more than that, she was moved by the legacy it represented, love passed down through generations, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. "Serena Dove," Gideon said, his voice trembling with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you build a life with me where love matters more than wealth, where dreams become reality through partnership, where two souls become one heartbeat for something larger than ourselves?" "Yes," Serena whispered, then louder with joy that could have powered the island's electricity. "Yes, yes, yes." As Gideon slipped the emerald ring onto her finger, Serena realized that she had found something rarer than any precious stone. She had found a love that would transform them both into the best versions of themselves, a partnership that would create beauty in the world long after their own footprints in the sand had been washed away by time's inevitable tide. Chapter 4. Fairy Tale Wedding. Some moments in life deserve to be preserved in crystal and starlight, woven into eternity's fabric where true love stories live forever. The Metropolitan Museum had been transformed into something existing between dreams and reality, where ivory silk and cascading white roses created an altar worthy of the love story about to be consecrated within its hallowed walls. Serena stood before the antique mirror in the museum's private bridal suite, her reflection showing a woman who had discovered that fairy tales could indeed come true for those brave enough to believe in forever. Her wedding gown flowed like liquid moonlight, the vintage lace that had adorned her grandmother's shoulders, now gracing her own in a beautiful continuation of family legacy. The emerald engagement ring caught the light from crystal chandeliers, but it was the radiant joy illuminating her features that truly made her breathtaking. "You look like an angel descended from heaven itself," Faith Harper whispered, her eyes misting with tears as she adjusted the cathedral train that would follow her sister down the aisle like a cloud of silk and dreams. "I feel like I'm about to step into the most beautiful chapter of my life," Serena replied, her voice trembling with anticipation and overwhelming gratitude for the miracle of finding her soulmate in a world that often seemed devoid of genuine connection. Elara Crest bustled around the bridal suite with the enthusiasm of someone living vicariously through her dearest friend's happiness, her own emerald silk gown chosen to complement the bride's ring, making her look like a woodland fairy tasked with ensuring everything remained perfect for this magical celebration. "I still can't believe you're marrying Manhattan's most eligible bachelor," Elara gushed, making final adjustments to Serena's veil. "When you walked into that charity gala, did you ever imagine you'd walk out with Prince Charming?" "I walked out with something far more precious than Prince Charming," Serena corrected gently. "I found my perfect match. My partner. My home." As the processional music began filtering through the museum's speakers like audible honey, Serena felt her heart expand with such pure joy that she wondered if it might simply float out of her chest and dance among the crystal teardrops of the chandeliers above. The great hall had been arranged to showcase both grandeur and intimacy, with 500 guests seated among arrangements of white peonies and ivory roses that seemed to glow with their own inner light. But as Serena began her walk down the flower-strewn aisle, the entire gathering faded into soft focus until only one person remained crystal clear. Gideon stood at the altar with tears of joy streaming down his face as he watched his bride approach. He looked magnificent in his custom-tailored mourning coat, but it was the expression of wonder and devotion in his eyes that made Serena's breath catch in her throat. This powerful man, who commanded boardrooms and influenced markets, stood before God, and witnesses looking as though he'd been granted a miracle he'd never dared request. When they joined hands at the altar, the world seemed to pause and hold its breath, recognizing that something sacred was taking place within these ancient walls, where countless love stories had been blessed and celebrated throughout the decades. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony and sanctity, "we gather today to witness the union of two hearts that have found their perfect complement in one another." The traditional words washed over the assembled guests, but Serena and Gideon remained lost in each other's eyes, their connection so profound that the elegant ceremony became merely the beautiful backdrop for their private communion of souls. When the moment came for personal vows, Gideon's voice trembled with emotion as he spoke, words that came directly from his transformed heart. "Serena, before I met you, I thought I understood what it meant to be successful. I measured my worth in dollars and achievements, in recognition and power. But you taught me that true wealth lies in finding someone who sees your soul and loves what they discover there." His thumb traced gentle circles across her knuckles as tears of joy sparkled like diamonds on her cheeks. "You showed me that the greatest fortune isn't what a man accumulates, but what he's willing to share. I promise to treasure your heart above all earthly riches, to support your dreams as passionately as you've embraced mine, and to love you with every breath I draw until my last day on this earth." Serena's response came through happy tears that made her voice sound like silver bells touched by morning dew. "Gideon, you've given me something I never knew I was searching for, a love that sees beyond surface beauty to the essence beneath, a partnership that makes us both stronger than we could ever be alone. I promise to stand beside you through prosperity and challenge, to celebrate your victories and comfort your defeats, to build our dreams together until we create something more beautiful than either of us could imagine individually. For richer or poorer, in joy and sorrow, I choose you today and always." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss tasted of promises kept and adventures yet to come, of a love story just beginning despite feeling as though it had been written in the stars since the dawn of time. The reception flowed like champagne and laughter, with toasts that honored not just the bride and groom, but the magic that had brought them together against all odds. Carver, Gideon's business partner and closest friend, raised his glass with words that made the assembled guests smile with recognition of true love's power. "I've known Gideon Wolfe for many years, and I've watched him conquer every challenge the business world could present. But I've never seen him conquered by anything until he met Serena. She didn't just win his heart, she transformed it, reminding us all that the most successful ventures are those that enrich the soul rather than merely the bank account. Faith Harper's maid of honor speech brought tears to many eyes, as she spoke of watching her sister discover a love that honored both her independence and her capacity for partnership. Serena has always been someone who gives her whole heart to everything she believes in. Today, watching her marry Gideon, I see that she's found someone worthy of that magnificent heart, someone who will cherish it as the treasure it truly is. But it was their first dance that truly captured the essence of their connection. As Etta Jameses at last filled the museum's great hall, Serena and Gideon moved together with the grace of two people who had found their rhythm in life, as well as on the dance floor. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Wolf?" Gideon murmured against her ear as they swayed to music that seemed written specifically for their love story. "Like coming home to a place I never knew existed but was always meant to find," Serena replied, her heart so full of gratitude and joy that she felt it might simply overflow and bathe the entire reception in golden light. Their honeymoon in Tuscany unfolded like pages from a romance novel written by angels who understood that true love deserved settings worthy of its beauty. They awakened each morning in a villa overlooking rolling vineyards, where the morning mist created landscapes that seemed painted by master artists who specialized in capturing heaven on earth. Afternoons were spent exploring medieval villages where cobblestone streets echoed with the footsteps of countless other lovers who had walked these paths through centuries of spring seasons and wedding celebrations. They sampled wines that had aged in underground cellars while their own love was still taking root, and they shared dinners on terraces where sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold that rivaled the blush on Serena's cheeks. "I've never been happier," Serena confessed one evening as they lay beneath Italian stars that seemed brighter and more numerous than any they'd ever seen before. "Neither have I," Gideon replied, pulling her closer until she could feel his heartbeat steady and strong against her cheek. "I keep expecting to wake up and discover this has all been the most beautiful dream. If it's a dream, then I never want to wake up," Serena whispered, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of wine and wonder, and the absolute certainty that some love stories were indeed destined to last forever. Chapter 5. Cracks in Paradise. Even the most beautiful porcelain can develop hairline fractures that remain invisible until light hits them at precisely the wrong angle. Serena noticed the first subtle changes in Gideon, like a musician detecting notes slightly off-key in a once perfect symphony, small discordances that might escape casual listeners, but struck her finely tuned heart with growing unease. The man who had once greeted her each evening with eyes lighting up like harbor beacons now often stared through her, as though seeing problems existing in dimensions she couldn't access. "Darling, dinner is ready," she called from their dining room, where candles flickered beside the fresh orchids she arranged daily, hoping to maintain the romantic ambiance that had once characterized every moment of their married life. "Give me 10 more minutes," Gideon replied from his home office, his voice carrying the distracted tone that had become as familiar as it was concerning. "I need to finish reviewing these quarterly reports." 10 minutes stretched into 30, then an hour, until Serena found herself dining alone while her husband's silhouette remained hunched over his computer screen like a modern atlas carrying burdens too heavy for mortal shoulders. The elaborate meal she'd planned grew cold while she sat surrounded by the beautiful life they'd built together, feeling more isolated than she had during her single years. When Gideon finally emerged from his office, exhaustion had carved new lines around his eyes, and tension had settled in his shoulders like an unwelcome permanent resident. "I'm sorry," he said automatically. The apology, as rehearsed as it was, inadequate. "The markets have been unpredictable lately, and I need to stay on top of every development." "You've been saying that for weeks," Serena observed gently, rising to heat his neglected dinner. "Perhaps it's time to tell me what's really happening." "Nothing you need to worry about," Gideon deflected, accepting the warmed plate with a gratitude that somehow felt more distant than appreciation should. "Business always has its challenges. This is just a particularly demanding period." But Serena's intuition, sharpened by deep love and careful observation, detected the tremor in his voice that suggested his troubles ran deeper than routine corporate stress. The man who had once shared his every thought and feeling with enthusiastic transparency had erected invisible barriers that seemed to grow higher with each passing conversation. Their art therapy center had officially opened to tremendous success, with children's laughter echoing through halls that had been funded with such generous enthusiasm. Yet, When Serena tried to share stories of breakthrough moments and healing victories, she found herself speaking to her husband, whose mind remained trapped in whatever private hell was consuming his thoughts. Today, little Emma painted her first picture since the accident Serena shared over breakfast, hoping to recapture some of their former connection through discussion of the cause they both cherished. She's been silent for weeks, but something about mixing watercolors helped her find her voice again. "That's wonderful," Gideon replied, but his eyes never left his smartphone screen where messages arrived with the relentless urgency of digital thunderstorms. "Gideon," Serena said firmly, her patience finally reaching its limit. "Please look at me when I'm speaking to you." He glanced up with the guilty expression of a student caught daydreaming in class, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his troubled eyes. "I'm sorry, darling. I'm listening." "No, you're not," Serena replied with the gentle honesty that had always characterized their relationship. "You're physically present, but emotionally you're somewhere else entirely. Where have you gone, and how do I find you again?" For a moment, vulnerability flickered across Gideon's features like lightning, illuminating storm clouds, and Serena glimpsed the frightened man hiding behind his successful facade, but just as quickly, the shutters slammed closed again. "I'm right here," he insisted. Though they both knew it wasn't true. "I'm just dealing with some complicated business situations that require intense focus." "What kind of situations?" Serena pressed, recognizing that their marriage's foundation demanded complete honesty, even when truth proved uncomfortable. "Market fluctuations, investment challenges, the usual corporate headaches," Gideon replied with practiced vagueness. "Nothing that won't resolve itself with proper attention and strategic planning." But late that night, as Gideon worked in his office with the desperate intensity of someone fighting an invisible war, Serena crept close enough to overhear fragments of hushed phone conversations that painted a far more alarming picture than his reassuring words had suggested. "We can't afford another quarter like this one," she heard him whisper into his phone, desperation making his voice sound foreign and frightened. "If the Henderson deal doesn't close, we're looking at catastrophic losses." Her heart clenched as she recognized the weight of genuine terror in her husband's voice, the sound of a man watching his world crumble despite his best efforts to hold everything together through sheer determination and denial. The following evening brought Carver to their penthouse for what was supposed to be a social dinner but quickly devolved into an intense business conference that excluded Serena from her own dining room. She retreated to their bedroom, pretending to read while actually straining to catch snippets of conversation that drifted through the walls like smoke from a distant fire. "The Singapore project was supposed to be our safety net," T's voice carried stress that matched Gideon's recent transformation. "Now it's become another liability we can't afford. There has to be a solution," Gideon replied with the stubborn determination of someone refusing to accept defeat. "We've weathered difficult periods before." "Not like this," T responded grimly. "This isn't a temporary downturn. This is systematic collapse across multiple sectors simultaneously." When T finally departed, leaving behind an atmosphere heavy with unspoken fears, Serena found Gideon standing at their floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the glittering city lights, as though searching for answers written in the urban constellation below. "Talk to me," she pleaded, approaching him with the careful tenderness reserved for wounded animals. "Please don't carry this burden alone." "I can handle it," Gideon insisted, but his reflection in the window showed a man who looked anything but capable of handling whatever storms were battering his professional life. "We promised to share everything," Serena reminded him, her hand finding his shoulder where tension had knotted his muscles into painful sculptures. "For richer or poorer, remember." At those words, Gideon's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, like ice breaking under unbearable weight. His shoulders sagged as though invisible chains had been dragging him toward some terrible precipice, and when he turned to face her, Serena saw fear naked in his eyes for the first time since they'd met. "The company is in serious trouble," he admitted, the words seeming to tear themselves from his throat like confessions extracted under torture. "We've made some catastrophic investment decisions, trusted the wrong advisors, expanded too aggressively into volatile markets." "How serious?" Serena asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would reshape their beautiful life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. "Serious enough that we might lose everything," Gideon whispered, his voice breaking on the admission. "The penthouse, the island, the lifestyle you've grown accustomed to, All of it could disappear if I can't find a way to turn things around. Serena felt the ground shift beneath her feet, but not because of potential financial loss. What devastated her was realizing that her husband, the man who had shared his deepest vulnerabilities during their courtship, had been suffering alone for weeks, while she remained oblivious to his pain. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her heart breaking not for their threatened fortune, but for the walls that had grown between them during his crisis. "Because I was supposed to protect you from this," Gideon replied, shame coloring his voice. "Because I was supposed to be strong enough to fix everything before you ever had to worry." "That's not how marriage works," Serena said firmly, taking his hands in hers with the same determination she'd shown when accepting his proposal in the island's sand. "We're partners, remember? Your problems are my problems. Your fights are my fights." As they held each other in their endangered paradise, neither could imagine how much deeper into darkness their troubles would soon descend, or how severely their love would be tested by betrayals that would make financial ruin seem like a gentle inconvenience. Chapter 6. When Love Means Sacrifice. True love reveals itself not in the giving of gifts, but in the surrendering of treasures, when surrender becomes the only language speaking of devotion. The morning light streaming through their penthouse windows illuminated the antique jewelry box that had belonged to Serena's grandmother, its contents representing 4 generations of family history, preserved in precious metals and gemstones that had witnessed countless celebrations, sorrows, and sacred moments. Yet, as Serena lifted each piece with reverent fingers, she felt no hesitation about what needed to be done. "You don't have to do this," Gideon said quietly from the bedroom doorway, his voice heavy with shame and gratitude warring for dominance in his wounded heart. "These pieces mean everything to your family's legacy. Our marriage means more than any heirloom," Serena replied with serene determination, holding up the diamond necklace that had graced her grandmother's throat on her own wedding day decades earlier. "Family treasures are meant to preserve what matters most. And right now, what matters most is us." She had awakened before dawn with crystalline clarity about her path forward, understanding that love required action rather than mere sentiment when crisis threatened to destroy everything they had built together. The financial catastrophe engulfing Gideon's empire demanded immediate sacrifice from someone willing to place relationship above personal attachment. These will bring enough to cover the most pressing mortgage payments. Serena calculated with the practical wisdom she had inherited from generations of strong women who had faced their own impossible choices with grace. "And I've made appointments with auction houses for the art collection this afternoon." Gideon's reflection in her vanity mirror showed a man wrestling with emotions too complex for simple categorization. Pride warred with pragmatism, masculine provider instincts battled with desperate gratitude, and overwhelming love for his wife competed with crushing guilt over requiring her sacrifice. "I'll find other ways," he protested weakly. Though they both knew his options had been exhausted through sleepless nights of financial engineering and increasingly desperate business maneuvers, "We'll find solutions together," Serena corrected firmly, turning to face him with eyes that blazed with unwavering commitment. "That's what partnership means, sharing both the burdens and the solutions." Her systematic dismantling of their luxurious lifestyle began immediately and proceeded with military efficiency, tempered by emotional wisdom. The priceless paintings that had transformed their penthouse into a private gallery found new homes with collectors who appreciated their beauty, though none would ever understand how each sale represented another small death of dreams deferred. The vintage wines Gideon had collected during his bachelor years disappeared into the cellars of restaurants, whose sommeliers assured discretion regarding their provenance. Crystal stemware that had toasted their engagement became anonymous lots in estate sales, their romantic history erased by necessity's cruel mathematics. "I hate watching you sacrifice everything that brings you joy," Gideon confessed one evening as Serena carefully wrapped the last of her grandmother's china in tissue paper with the tenderness of someone preparing beloved artifacts for burial. "You bring me joy," she replied simply, her fingers lingering on the delicate rose pattern that had served countless family dinners through generations of laughter and tears. "Everything else is just beautiful decoration around the only thing that actually matters." Ilara Crest proved invaluable during these painful weeks, arriving at their penthouse with the enthusiasm of someone determined to transform tragedy into manageable adventure through sheer force of optimistic energy. "I found a discreet auction house that specializes in estate jewelry," Ilara announced. brandishing business cards with the triumph of someone who had solved particularly challenging puzzles. They guarantee privacy and premium prices for pieces with documented provenance. "Thank you for helping with this," Serena said gratefully, embracing her dearest friend with the relief of someone discovering she wouldn't have to navigate treacherous waters entirely alone. "I don't know how I would manage everything without your support." "That's what best friends are for," Ilara declared with warm conviction. "Besides, I rather enjoy playing the role of fairy godmother, helping to save Prince Charming's kingdom through clever resource management." Together, they spent long afternoons researching market values, scheduling appointments with buyers, and orchestrating the complex logistics of converting a lifetime's accumulated beauty into liquid assets that could stem the hemorrhaging of Gideon's business empire. "You're remarkably calm about all this," Ilara observed during one particularly intensive session of cataloging valuable items for sale. "Most women would be devastated at losing so many precious things." "Things can be replaced," Serena replied philosophically, holding up a sapphire bracelet to catch the afternoon light one final time before placing it in the velvet-lined case, destined for tomorrow's auction. "What Gideon and I have together is irreplaceable. You truly love him beyond measure, don't you?" Ilara asked with something unreadable flickering in her expression. "By measure, beyond reason, beyond any price that could ever be calculated," Serena confirmed without hesitation. "I would sell my soul if it meant saving our marriage." The mortgage crisis reached its crescendo during a particularly brutal week when foreclosure notices began arriving with the regularity of daily newspapers, each official document representing another countdown to potential homelessness, despite their penthouse's luxurious facade. "The bank won't extend our deadline beyond the end of this month," Gideon reported, after returning from what he diplomatically termed a negotiation session, but which had clearly been a humiliating exercise in begging for mercy from unsympathetic financial institutions. "Then we'll meet their deadline," Serena declared with the confidence of someone who had discovered reserves of strength she never knew existed. "I received the check from the jewelry auction this morning, and the final art pieces sell tomorrow." She had taken additional measures that she hadn't yet shared with Gideon, obtaining employment with a catering company that specialized in the same high society events she had once attended as a guest rather than a server. The irony wasn't lost on her. She now worked behind the scenes at galas similar to the one where she had met her husband, her hands serving champagne to people who had once considered her their social equal. The physical demands of catering work left her exhausted but strangely fulfilled, each paycheck representing a tangible contribution to their survival that no inherited jewelry could match. She returned home each evening with aching feet and tired muscles, but also with the satisfaction of someone actively fighting for her marriage rather than passively watching it crumble. "You're working too hard," Gideon observed one night as he massaged her shoulders with the gentle reverence of someone handling spun glass. "I see how exhausted you are every evening." "I'm working exactly as hard as necessary," Serena replied, leaning into his touch with gratitude for these moments of intimacy that reminded her why every sacrifice felt worthwhile. "And I'm not tired. I'm energized by doing everything possible to save what we've built together." The final mortgage payment represented the culmination of weeks that had transformed them from a wealthy couple into something more valuable, true partners who had learned that love could survive the loss of everything except each other. "We did it," Gideon whispered as they held the receipt that proved their home remained safely theirs, his voice carrying wonder as though he couldn't quite believe their narrow escape from financial catastrophe. "We survived," Serena corrected gently, understanding that their victory represented not the end of their trials, but proof of their relationship's ability to weather storms that would have destroyed weaker foundations. As they celebrated with champagne purchased from their corner grocery store rather than imported from French vineyards, neither recognized that their greatest test still lay ahead, that the woman who had helped orchestrate their salvation was simultaneously orchestrating their destruction. And that betrayal often wears the face of friendship until the moment it reveals its true nature with devastating precision. But for tonight, holding each other in their saved home while autumn rain painted silver patterns on their windows, they allowed themselves to believe that love had conquered all their demons and that their trials had ended, rather than simply evolved into something infinitely more painful. Chapter 7. The Ultimate Betrayal. Sometimes the heart shatters so completely that the sound echoes through every room of a home that will never again deserve to be called a sanctuary. The key turned in the penthouse lock with the familiar whisper of homecoming that had always filled Serena with warmth and anticipation. But today, she moved through the entryway with the excited energy of someone bearing gifts that would transform an ordinary evening into a celebration. Hidden in her designer purse lay the surprise that had taken weeks to arrange. Reservations at the intimate French restaurant where Gideon had proposed expanding her art therapy dreams, along with a bottle of champagne vintage enough to honor their triumph over financial catastrophe. "Darling, I'm home early." She called toward the study where she expected to find her husband hunched over financial reports, finally allowing himself to breathe after their narrow escape from bankruptcy's clutches. "I have the most wonderful surprise planned for us tonight." Silence greeted her announcement with unusual weight, broken only by sounds drifting from their bedroom that made her pause with growing confusion. Soft laughter, intimate murmurs, the unmistakable rustle of silk against skin sounds that belonged to her marriage, but were occurring during hours when Gideon should have been alone with his business recovery strategies. Serena set down her purse with hands that had begun trembling without conscious permission, her mind refusing to process the increasingly obvious explanation for what she was hearing. Surely Gideon was conducting a business call, perhaps with international partners whose time zones demanded unusual meeting schedules. But as she approached their bedroom suite, the sounds grew clearer and more impossible to misinterpret. Whispered endearments in her husband's voice, breathless responses in tones that struck her heart like physical blows, because she recognized the voice, answering his intimate words. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar, creating a sliver of revelation that would forever divide her life into before and after this moment. Through that cruel gap, Serena witnessed the destruction of everything she had believed sacred, everything she had sacrificed to preserve, everything she had thought worth fighting to save. Gideon lay entwined with Ilara Crest in the bed where he and Serena had whispered their dreams and made love with the passion of soulmates who had found their perfect match. But now, those same silk sheets wrapped around her husband and her dearest friend, their bodies moving together with the familiarity of lovers who had clearly shared this intimacy many times before. "God, Ilara." Gideon murmured with reverent hunger as he traced kisses along her throat. "I've needed this so desperately." "I know, darling." Ilara responded with breathless satisfaction, her manicured fingers threading through his hair with possessive confidence. "I've been waiting for the right moment when we could finally stop pretending." The words struck Serena like physical blows, each syllable driving deeper understanding into her consciousness with surgical precision. This wasn't a moment of weakness or spontaneous passion. This was an established affair, a deliberate deception, a calculated betrayal that had been unfolding while she sold her family treasures to save their marriage. "She still doesn't suspect anything?" Ilara asked with casual cruelty that made Serena's blood freeze in her veins. "Nothing," Gideon confirmed with satisfaction that transformed his voice into something unrecognizable. "She's been so focused on playing the devoted wife, sacrificing everything to save our sinking ship, that she hasn't noticed I've been finding comfort elsewhere." Poor, innocent Serena. Ilara cooed with mockery disguised as sympathy, working herself to exhaustion while her husband finds solace with someone who actually understands his world. The conversation continued with details that lacerated Serena's heart with each revelation. How long their affair had been progressing, how they had orchestrated opportunities to be together, how they had laughed about her naive devotion while planning their passionate encounters in the very home she had fought so desperately to save. Serena found herself unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to do anything except absorb the complete annihilation of her reality, while her legs threatened to buckle beneath the weight of such comprehensive betrayal. When movement finally returned to her frozen limbs, she pushed open the bedroom door with the mechanical precision of someone operating purely on autopilot, stepping into the space where her marriage had just died, with all the ceremony of an execution. "How long?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying deadly calm that made both lovers freeze in guilty recognition of their exposure. Gideon scrambled for the sheet to cover his nakedness, but his attempts at modesty struck Serena as pathetically inadequate after what she had already witnessed. Ilara made no such effort, instead regarding her best friend with a defiant challenge that revealed the true extent of her calculated cruelty. "Serena, this isn't what it looks like." Gideon began with the automatic dishonesty of someone caught in indefensible circumstances. "Really?" Serena replied with bitter precision. Because it looks like my husband is having an affair with my maid of honor in the bed I've been sharing with him throughout our entire marriage. We never meant for you to find out this way." Ilara offered with false compassion that made Serena's stomach turn with revulsion. "How long?" Serena repeated, her voice growing stronger with righteous fury that was beginning to burn through her initial shock. "Does it matter?" Gideon asked defensively, as though the duration of their betrayal somehow affected its fundamental wrongness. "It matters to me," Serena said with steel in her voice. "How long have you been lying to my face while I sold everything I owned to save our marriage?" The silence stretched between them like an ocean of guilt until Ilara answered with casual cruelty that revealed her true nature more clearly than any passionate declaration could have managed. Since the financial crisis began, she admitted with brazen confidence, he needed someone who understood his world, someone who could offer comfort without making him feel like a failure. "And I made him feel like a failure?" Serena asked with dangerous, quiet. "You made him feel guilty," Ilara clarified with poisonous sweetness. "All that sacrifice, all that devotion, all that determination to save what you called your marriage, it was suffocating him with obligation. While you offered what instead?" Serena demanded, though part of her already knew the answer. "Freedom." Ilara replied triumphantly. "Freedom from guilt, from responsibility, from having to pretend your marriage was worth saving when it had clearly run its course." Gideon finally found his voice, though it carried none of the authority or conviction she had once found so compelling. "Serena, please let me explain." "Explain what?" She interrupted with fury that had been building like pressure behind a dam finally allowed to burst. "Explain how you let me humiliate myself, working as a caterer while you were having afternoon liaisons with my best friend. Explain how you accepted my family jewelry to pay your debts while planning to replace me with someone who found your failures exciting rather than heartbreaking." "It wasn't planned," Gideon protested weakly. "It just happened during all the stress and uncertainty. Nothing just happens." Serena corrected with bitter wisdom. "People make choices, and you chose to betray the woman who was willing to sacrifice everything for you." She moved through their bedroom with methodical precision, gathering the few personal items that still felt authentically hers after so much had been sold to save their sinking financial ship. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had sold her treasures to preserve their marriage while her husband was actively destroying it through deliberate infidelity. "Where will you go?" Gideon asked, and she caught something that might have been regret in his voice, though it was far too little and infinitely too late. "Somewhere honest," Serena replied, without looking back at the man who had proven unworthy of everything she had given him. "Somewhere I don't have to question whether the person sharing my bed actually wants to be there." As she reached the penthouse entrance with her single suitcase containing the remnants of her former life, Serena turned back for one final look at the home she had fought so hard to save. "I hope she's worth everything you've lost," she said with quiet dignity that made her betrayal's magnitude clear without descending to their level of cruelty. The elevator doors closed on her marriage with the finality of a coffin lid, carrying her away from the beautiful lie her life had become, and toward an uncertain future where at least the loneliness would be honest rather than hidden behind false promises and calculated deceptions. Chapter 8. Fighting for Survival. Rock bottom has a peculiar gift. It provides a solid foundation from which the strongest souls learn to rebuild themselves into something more magnificent than they ever imagined possible. The modest apartment that Serena now called home possessed none of the penthouse's luxurious amenities. But as morning sunlight streamed through windows she had hung with simple cotton curtains, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, peace that came from living without lies. The second-hand furniture and discount store dinnerware represented honest poverty rather than the gilded deception her marriage had become. Her cell phone's shrill ring interrupted the quiet sanctuary she had been savoring with her morning coffee. But the caller identification made her stomach clench with familiar dread. Vance Thorne, attorney at law, appeared on her screen with the regularity of a malevolent digital stalker, each call bringing fresh threats disguised as legal communications. "Mrs. Wolf." The voice oozed false politeness that barely concealed predatory anticipation. "I trust you received our latest correspondence regarding your husband's outstanding debts." "It's Miss Dove now." Serena corrected with dignity she had learned to wield like armor against those who sought to diminish her. "And I've told you repeatedly that I'm not responsible for debts I neither incurred nor authorized." Marriage creates joint liability in many financial situations. Vance Thorne continued with the satisfaction of someone explaining inevitable doom to condemned prisoners. Your signature appears on several documents that make you equally responsible for amounts totaling just over $2 million. The number struck her like a physical blow. Though she had suspected the magnitude of Gideon's financial catastrophe extended far beyond what he had revealed during their increasingly distant final months together. $2 million represented more than she could earn in several lifetimes, even if she worked every available hour at jobs that paid living wages rather than survival rations. I never signed documents authorizing such debts, Serena protested, though her voice lacked the conviction she wished she could summon. Perhaps you should review your signature more carefully, Thorne suggested with malicious amusement that made her skin crawl. Forgery allegations would require proving intent to deceive, which becomes complicated when wives sign documents their husbands present during normal domestic routines. The implication sent cold terror down Serena's spine as she realized Gideon must have obtained her signature on financial documents by disguising them as routine household paperwork, insurance forms, property deeds, investment authorizations that she had signed trustingly while focused on their domestic happiness rather than legal implications. "What exactly are you demanding?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would reshape her precarious new life in ways she wasn't prepared to handle. "Full payment within 30 days, or we begin asset seizure procedures," Thorne announced with bureaucratic cruelty that reminded her why she had lost faith in the legal system's capacity for compassion. "Your current wages will be garnished, your bank accounts frozen, and any valuable possessions liquidated to satisfy outstanding obligations." After disconnecting the call that felt like a death sentence delivered through modern technology, Serena sat in her small kitchen, surrounded by the humble possessions she had accumulated since leaving her marriage. Understanding that even this modest sanctuary could be stripped away by legal mechanisms she didn't understand but couldn't escape. The business card lay crumpled in her purse where she had carried it for weeks without finding courage to make the call that might represent her only hope of survival. Titan Stone, attorney at law, had been recommended by the social worker at her art therapy center, someone who understood that good people sometimes needed protection from systems designed to benefit those with power rather than those seeking justice. Mr. Stone's office answered a warm voice that carried none of the predatory anticipation she had learned to expect from legal professionals. "I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding debt collection harassment," Serena said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded when discussing circumstances that threatened to destroy her carefully rebuilt stability. "Can you come in this afternoon?" the receptionist asked with efficiency tempered by genuine concern. "Mr. Stone often takes cases involving financial abuse, and he'll want to review your situation as quickly as possible." The law office occupied the third floor of a restored brownstone in a neighborhood that balanced professional dignity with accessibility expensive enough to inspire confidence, affordable enough to suggest attorneys who remembered their obligation to serve justice rather than merely accumulate wealth. Serena climbed the stairs with nervous energy that combined hope with terror of discovering that even legal representation might prove beyond her financial reach. The waiting room reflected thoughtful design choices that prioritized comfort over intimidation. Soft leather chairs arranged around coffee tables displaying legal journals alongside current magazines, artwork that celebrated justice rather than wealth, and windows that filled the space with natural light rather than harsh fluorescent glare that made vulnerable people feel like specimens under microscopes. Titan Stone stood as she entered his office, and Serena found herself momentarily startled by his unexpected presence. Where she had anticipated another Vance Thorne polished predator in expensive suits, she discovered a man whose strength seemed rooted in principle rather than profit. His handshake conveyed warmth and competence, while his eyes held the kindness of someone who genuinely cared about the people seeking his protection. The office itself reflected his character. Law books that showed actual use rather than decorative display, diplomas hung with pride but not arrogance, photographs showing him volunteering at legal aid clinics rather than posing with wealthy clients. Everything about the space suggested a lawyer who had chosen service over status, justice over profit margins. "Please, sit down and tell me what's happening," he invited, gesturing toward comfortable chairs arranged more like a consultation than an interrogation. "I understand you're facing some challenging legal circumstances." As Serena recounted her story, the fairy tale marriage, the financial crisis, her sacrificial attempts to save their home, the devastating betrayal, and now the legal threats that followed her into her new life like malevolent shadows, Titan listened with attention that reminded her how rare genuine interest had become in her recent experience. His questions demonstrated not just professional competence, but personal investment in her well-being. He took detailed notes, asked for clarification on timeline details, and occasionally paused to explain legal concepts in language she could understand, rather than hiding behind technical jargon that would have left her feeling more confused and powerless. "Your husband forged your signature on financial documents?" Titan asked, his voice carrying controlled anger that seemed directed at Gideon rather than skepticism about her claims. "I believe so," Serena admitted. "I remember signing papers he said were insurance updates or property maintenance authorizations, but I never knowingly agreed to personal liability for business debts. That's fraud," Titan stated with conviction that made her heart leap with unexpected hope. "If we can prove he misrepresented the nature of documents you signed, we can challenge your liability for those debts entirely." "But can you prove it?" Serena asked, afraid to believe that legal solutions might exist for problems that had seemed insurmountable. "We'll subpoena the original documents, compare signatures, examine the circumstances under which they were obtained," Titan explained with the confidence of someone who had fought similar battles before. "More importantly, we'll demonstrate that you received no benefit from these debts and had no knowledge of their true purpose." His detailed explanation of their legal strategy revealed both technical expertise and strategic thinking that impressed her with its thoroughness. He outlined potential challenges they might face, explained the timeline for various legal procedures, and prepared her for the emotional demands of litigation without sugarcoating the difficulties ahead. "I can't afford extensive legal representation," Serena confessed with embarrassment that burned her cheeks. "I'm working as a catering assistant just to pay rent on a studio apartment." "This kind of case often qualifies for contingency representation," Titan replied gently. "I only collect fees if we win your case, and then only from whatever settlement or judgment we obtain." The offer seemed too generous to be genuine, prompting Serena to study his face for signs of the deception she had learned to expect from men who made promises that sounded too good to be true. "Why would you take such a risk?" she asked directly. "Because I became a lawyer to protect people from exactly this kind of abuse," Titan answered with simplicity that carried more conviction than elaborate legal arguments. "Your husband used your trust in your marriage to defraud you, then abandoned you to face consequences for his crimes. That's not just legally wrong, it's morally reprehensible." Over the following weeks, as Titan built their case with methodical precision, Serena discovered what competent legal representation felt like when provided by someone who viewed her as a person rather than a profit opportunity. He explained each development in language she could understand, returned her calls promptly, and treated her concerns with respect that reminded her of her own worth. Their meetings became islands of hope in an ocean of uncertainty, professional consultations that somehow felt like conversations with someone who genuinely cared about her well-being beyond the legal outcome. Titan possessed the rare ability to balance emotional support with practical strategy, offering comfort when she felt overwhelmed, while maintaining the focus necessary to build their strongest possible case. The document analysis came back, Titan announced during one of their regular meetings, his expression carrying satisfaction that made her pulse quicken with anticipation. "3 different handwriting experts confirmed that your signatures were traced or forged on the most significant debt authorizations." "What does that mean for my case?" Serena asked, hardly daring to hope for complete vindication. "It means we have grounds to challenge every debt they've attributed to you." Titan replied with the confidence of someone who had just been handed the keys to victory. "It also means your ex-husband may face criminal charges for fraud and forgery." The news felt surreal after months of believing herself trapped in legal quicksand with no possibility of escape. Titan's steady competence had transformed her from victim to victor, his expertise providing the weapon she needed to fight battles she couldn't have won alone. As they worked together toward her legal salvation, Serena began noticing qualities in Titan that transcended professional competence. His genuine concern for her well-being, his anger at injustices she had suffered, his determination to restore not just her financial freedom, but her faith in human decency. "You've given me something I never expected to find again," she said quietly during one of their final preparation meetings before the trial. "What's that?" Titan asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected her answer. "Hope," she replied simply. "You've reminded me that there are still people in this world who fight for what's right rather than what's profitable." "Thank me when we win," Titan replied. But his smile suggested their partnership had already given him something valuable in return. The opportunity to use his skills in service of someone who truly deserved protection, someone whose courage had inspired him to be the lawyer he had always intended to become. Chapter 9. The Final Battle. Justice wears no crown and carries no scepter. Yet when she finally arrives in courtrooms where truth battles deception, her presence transforms ordinary proceedings into sacred theater where souls are weighed against evidence of their choices. The courthouse steps seem to stretch endlessly upward like a marble stairway to judgment itself. Each footfall echoing with the weight of everything Serena had lost and everything she hoped to reclaim through legal vindication. Titan walked beside her with steady confidence that reminded her why she had learned to trust his guidance through the labyrinthine complexities of civil litigation, his presence offering strength when her own courage threatened to falter. "Remember what we discussed," Titan murmured, as they approached the imposing bronze doors that would soon open onto the arena where her future would be determined. "Answer only what's asked, speak clearly, and trust that the evidence supports everything you're going to say." Inside the courtroom, Serena felt the familiar sensation of entering a world governed by rules she didn't fully understand, but must navigate successfully to reclaim her freedom from debts she had never knowingly incurred. The mahogany paneling and leather-bound legal volumes created an atmosphere of gravitas that reminded everyone present that serious matters would be decided within these walls. The gallery filled slowly with spectators drawn by the drama of a high-profile financial case. Journalists with notebooks ready to capture every damaging revelation, legal professionals eager to witness Titan Stone's courtroom skills, and curious members of the public who had followed the story through media coverage. Each face represented someone who would judge her credibility, her character, her worthiness for legal protection. Vance Thorne sat at the plaintiff's table with the smug confidence of someone who believed victory was predetermined by superior resources and legal technicalities. His expensive suit and gold watch caught the light from tall windows, creating an image of success that masked the predatory nature of his profession. Beside him sat representatives from various creditors, their faces reflecting the cold calculations of businesses seeking to extract maximum profit from human misery. But what made Serena's breath catch in her throat was the sight of Gideon entering the courtroom with Ilara Crest clinging to his arm like an elegant parasite feeding off his diminished but still considerable wealth. He looked older, more haggard, his once confident bearing replaced by the nervous energy of someone who had learned that consequences eventually arrive to collect debts that go beyond money. Ilara had dressed for the occasion in a way that seemed calculated to emphasize the contrast between her polished sophistication and Serena's more modest appearance. Her designer suit and expensive jewelry sent a clear message about which woman belonged in Gideon's wealthy world, which woman was worthy of his affections. The sight of her grandmother's emerald necklace, sold during the financial crisis, now adorning Ilara's throat, struck Serena like a physical blow. "Don't look at them," Titan advised quietly, his hand briefly touching her shoulder with reassuring warmth. "Focus on why we're here and what we're fighting to achieve." Judge Marina Gold entered with the dignity befitting someone tasked with weighing evidence and dispensing justice according to laws that protected both the innocent and the guilty, depending on whose attorney presented the more convincing arguments. Her silver hair and penetrating gaze suggested someone who had presided over enough human dramas to recognize truth when it finally decided to make an appearance. The courtroom's atmosphere grew tense as preliminary motions were heard and procedural matters settled. Titan had warned Serena that these technical discussions might seem boring, but were crucial to establishing the legal framework within which her case would be decided. She watched him navigate objections and counter-motions with the skill of someone who understood that justice often turned on seemingly minor procedural victories. In the matter of multiple creditors versus Serena Dove, Judge Gold announced, her voice carrying authority that instantly commanded attention from everyone present, "We are here to determine the defendant's liability for debts allegedly incurred during her marriage to Gideon Wolfe." Vance Thorne rose with theatrical flourish, his opening statement painting Serena as a woman who had enjoyed the benefits of her husband's business ventures and therefore bore equal responsibility for their financial consequences. His words twisted her sacrifices into evidence of guilt, her devotion into proof of complicity, her innocence into calculated deception. Mrs. Dove lived in luxury, purchased with borrowed money. Thorne declared with righteous indignation that rang hollow to anyone who knew the true circumstances. She wore jewelry bought on credit, lived in homes mortgaged beyond their value, and participated in a lifestyle that required extensive debt financing. She cannot now claim ignorance of obligations that funded her privileged existence. His presentation was masterful in its manipulation of facts, taking elements of truth and twisting them into a narrative that portrayed Serena as a willing participant in financial fraud rather than its innocent victim. He produced photographs of their penthouse, their Caribbean island, her expensive gowns at charity events, all evidence of a lifestyle that seemed inconsistent with claims of financial ignorance. When Titan stood to present their defense, his presence seemed to fill the courtroom with a different energy, not the aggressive posturing that characterized so many legal proceedings, but the quiet strength of someone confident in his ability to reveal truth through careful presentation of facts rather than emotional manipulation. Your Honor, Titan began with respectful authority. The evidence will show that Miss Dove was not a willing participant in her husband's financial schemes, but rather their most innocent victim. She sacrificed her personal inheritance, her family treasures, even her physical comfort, working multiple jobs to save a marriage that was being destroyed by the very man now seeking to escape responsibility for his crimes. The testimony unfolded like a dramatic revelation of human nature's capacity for both nobility and betrayal. Expert witnesses confirmed that Serena's signatures on crucial debt documents had been forged or obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation. Bank records showed that she had never personally benefited from the loans now threatening her financial future, while mortgage payments and living expenses had been covered by the sale of her legitimate assets. A handwriting expert took the stand with magnified copies of signature samples, pointing out inconsistencies that were invisible to untrained eyes but clearly indicated forgery to someone with professional expertise. The testimony was technical but damning, establishing beyond reasonable doubt that Serena's signature had been duplicated without her knowledge or consent on documents that created millions of dollars in personal liability. Miss Dove, Titan said gently when she took the witness stand, his voice carrying encouragement that helped steady her nerves. Please tell the court how you learned about your husband's financial difficulties. He was distant, stressed, working late into the night, Serena replied, her voice growing stronger as she recounted the painful memories. When I pressed him for information, he admitted we were facing bankruptcy, but assured me it was temporary. What did you do with this information? I began selling everything I owned, she said simply, the words carrying more power than elaborate explanations. My grandmother's jewelry, my art collection, furniture that had been in my family for generations. I took employment as a catering assistant to help with household expenses. Her testimony painted a picture of devotion and sacrifice that struck even the most cynical observers as genuine. She spoke of working 12-hour days at catering events, of selling family heirlooms that had been intended for future generations, of believing that her marriage was worth any sacrifice required to preserve it. Were you aware that your husband was accumulating additional debts during this period? Titan continued, his questions designed to establish her complete ignorance of the fraudulent transactions. No, Serena answered with conviction that resonated throughout the courtroom. I believed we were fighting together to save our marriage and our home. I had no idea he was creating new financial obligations while I was sacrificing everything to pay existing ones. Did your husband ever ask you to sign documents related to these business debts? He presented papers he said were insurance updates and property maintenance authorizations. Serena replied with quiet dignity. I signed them because I trusted my husband to tell me the truth about what I was signing. When Vance Thorne cross-examined her, his questions grew increasingly aggressive as he failed to find inconsistencies in her testimony or evidence of the complicity his case required for success. His attacks on her character and motivations only served to make her appear more sympathetic to the jury, more clearly the victim of elaborate deception. Isn't it true that you signed documents your husband presented to you without reading them carefully? Thorne demanded, with accusatory intensity. I signed papers, he told me, were insurance updates and property maintenance authorizations. Serena replied with dignity and tact. I trusted my husband to tell me the truth about what I was signing. That trust was misplaced, wasn't it? Yes, she admitted with quiet sadness. It was catastrophically misplaced. The most dramatic moment came when Gideon himself took the witness stand, his testimony revealing a man wrestling with guilt and self-justification in equal measure. Under Titan's skillful questioning, he admitted to obtaining Serena's signature through deception, acknowledged her financial sacrifices to save their marriage, and confessed that she had never knowingly agreed to personal liability for his business debts. "You forged your wife's signature on financial documents totaling over $2 million, Titan stated with controlled precision, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom like an indictment from a higher power. "I misrepresented the nature of what she was signing," Gideon replied weakly, his attempts at legal euphemism failing to disguise the magnitude of his betrayal. "You committed fraud against your own wife while she was sacrificing her inheritance to save your marriage," Titan pressed, his anger barely contained within professional boundaries. "Yes," Gideon whispered, tears beginning to stream down his face as shame finally overcame his attempts at self-preservation. "You allowed your wife to sell her family treasures while you were having an affair with her maid of honor," Titan stated with controlled fury that made several jurors visibly react with disgust. "I never intended for things to happen that way," Gideon replied weakly, his voice barely audible as shame consumed his remaining composure. "But they did happen that way, didn't they, Mr. Wolf? While Miss Dove worked multiple jobs to save your marriage, you were destroying it through deliberate infidelity." "Yes," Gideon whispered, his admission carrying the weight of complete moral collapse. Ilara Crest's presence in the courtroom as Gideon's new companion provided a visual reminder of the betrayals that had accompanied his financial crimes, her expensive clothing and jewelry contrasting sharply with Serena's modest dress and determined dignity. When spectators noticed Serena's former emerald necklace adorning Ilara's throat, audible murmurs of disapproval rippled through the gallery. The final witnesses included social workers from Serena's art therapy center, testifying about her character and dedication to helping children heal through creative expression. Their testimony painted a picture of someone whose entire life was devoted to service and healing, making the accusations against her seem even more implausible. As closing arguments concluded and Judge Gold announced an overnight recess to consider the verdict, tension filled the courtroom like electricity before a thunderstorm. Everything Serena had fought for hung in the balance: her freedom from debt, her ability to rebuild her life, her faith in justice's capacity to protect the innocent from the consequences of others' crimes. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Titan said as they stood on the courthouse steps while autumn wind scattered leaves like scattered dreams around their feet, "you've already proven your strength and dignity. You've shown everyone in that courtroom what integrity looks like under pressure." "I couldn't have done this without you," Serena replied, meaning far more than legal representation in her words of gratitude. "Yes, you could have," Titan corrected gently, his eyes holding admiration that went beyond professional appreciation. "You already had everything necessary to fight this battle. I just helped you understand how to use weapons you already possessed." As they parted ways for what might be their final evening before the verdict determined her fate, neither spoke of the connection that had grown between them during weeks of working together toward justice, though both recognized that tomorrow would bring changes that extended far beyond legal victory or defeat. Chapter 10. Love's True Victory. Morning light streaming through courtroom windows carried the promise that some battles end not just with victory, but with the kind of triumph that transforms wounded souls into something more beautiful than they ever imagined possible. Judge Marina Gold entered with documents that would either vindicate Serena's faith in justice or condemn her to financial servitude for crimes she had never committed. The courtroom held its collective breath as she settled behind her bench, with the gravity of someone about to pronounce judgment that would reshape multiple lives with carefully chosen words. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, Judge Gold began, her voice carrying the weight of legal authority tempered by human compassion. "This court finds the defendant, Serena Dove, bears no liability for debts incurred through fraudulent misrepresentation of document contents and forged signatures." Relief flooded through Serena, with such intensity that her knees threatened to buckle, only Titan's steadying hand on her arm keeping her upright as the verdict's implications crashed over her like a tsunami of vindication. Free, she was finally, legally, completely free from the financial chains that had threatened to drag her into poverty as punishment for loving too deeply and trusting too completely. Furthermore, Judge Gold continued with satisfaction that suggested her own approval of the verdict. This court recommends that the district attorney's office investigate possible criminal charges against Gideon Wolfe for fraud, forgery, and financial abuse. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of approval from spectators who had followed the case and recognized justice when it finally made its long-awaited appearance. Vance Thorne gathered his papers with the bitter efficiency of someone accustomed to winning through intimidation rather than merit, his defeat serving as a reminder that truth occasionally triumphs over expensive legal maneuvering. But Serena's attention focused on Gideon, who sat at the opposing table with tears streaming down his face. As the full magnitude of his losses became undeniably clear, he had sacrificed a woman who loved him unconditionally for an affair that had provided temporary pleasure but permanent regret. Alara Crest sat beside him with growing discomfort as she realized her association with a man facing potential criminal charges might prove less glamorous than she had anticipated. "Congratulations," Titan said softly, his professional satisfaction mixing with personal joy that made his eyes shine with warmth that transcended attorney-client relationships. "You're free from all of it, the debts, the harassment, the fear of losing everything you've worked to rebuild. I don't know how to thank you," Serena replied through tears of relief and gratitude that had been building pressure behind carefully maintained composure for months of legal uncertainty. "There is something you could do," Titan said with sudden nervousness that replaced his courtroom confidence with endearing vulnerability. Before she could ask what he meant, Titan moved with decisive grace that took her breath away. In the middle of the courtroom, where her legal victory had just been announced, with dozens of witnesses, including her former husband and his mistress, watching in stunned amazement, Titan dropped to one knee on the polished marble floor. "Serena Dove," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtroom with words that made her heart stop beating for several eternal seconds. "I've watched you face impossible challenges with dignity that inspired me to be a better lawyer and a better man." From his pocket, he produced a simple but beautiful ring, not the ostentatious display of wealth that might have been expected, but a classic solitaire that spoke of timeless elegance and sincere devotion rather than financial power. "I've fallen in love with your courage, your kindness, your refusal to become bitter despite betrayals that would have destroyed weaker spirits." Titan continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend my life proving that some men are worthy of the trust you're brave enough to offer?" The proposal struck the courtroom like lightning, transforming a legal proceeding into something far more profound. A demonstration that love could indeed triumph over betrayal, that second chances existed for those courageous enough to risk their hearts again after devastating disappointment. "Yes," Serena whispered, then louder with joy that filled every corner of the room. "Yes. Yes, yes." As Titan slipped the ring onto her finger with reverent care, the courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause from strangers who recognized they were witnessing something remarkable, not just a legal victory, but the triumph of hope over despair, love over betrayal, faith over cynicism. Gideon's sobs grew louder as he watched the woman he had thrown away accept a proposal from a man who clearly understood her worth. Elara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, perhaps realizing for the first time that her victory in stealing another woman's husband had ultimately cost her the respect of everyone present, including the man she had won through deception. Judge Gold smiled from her bench with the satisfaction of someone who had presided over genuine justice rather than mere legal technicality. "Court is adjourned," she announced, "and may I offer congratulations to the happy couple." As Titan helped Serena to her feet, both of them radiant with the joy of victory and new love, they turned to leave the courtroom that had witnessed not just legal vindication, but the beginning of a love story built on mutual respect rather than financial attraction. Behind them, Gideon remained alone in his seat, crying as he finally understood the magnitude of what he had lost through his selfishness and betrayal. Elara sat beside him but offered no comfort, her own discomfort suggesting she was already calculating her exit strategy from an association that no longer provided the social status she had sought. But Serena heard none of his tears, saw none of his regret. She walked through the courthouse halls with Titan by her side, her laughter echoing off marble walls like music, celebrating the most beautiful kind of victory, not just winning a legal battle, but finding a love worthy of her magnificent heart. The sound of her joy filled the corridor with such pure happiness that even strangers smiled to hear it. recognizing the laughter of someone who had survived betrayal, and discovered that some stories truly do end with the right person finding their way home to a love that will last forever. The end.